Okay. So welcome to the third episode of The Greatest Hits. Today I'm joined by Master Aeron Harper, who is both a mod and a Laurel for combat research, and one of the premier instructors for rapier and cut and thrust in the SCA. He's won numerous SCA and HEMA tournaments over the years and had many great students. I've taken some of his classes personally, and I've always enjoyed them. So welcome, Aeron.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. So if you wanna talk about yourself, I'd usually tell my guests to brag about themselves a little bit, talk about your history, how long you fenced, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I can give kind of my background. I had straight up. I don't keep track of how many tournaments I've won. Scores is all I can say. I know that Dom and Miguel had some inclination, but I started fencing in the SCA around 1995. YOLO very quickly showed me the 3 Elizabethan fencing manuals. And at that point, I was kind of a little bit interested, not really interested in fencing. And then when I saw those, I thought, oh, so they actually wrote down how they did this stuff. And that's what kind of piqued my interest. I wanted to see what was happening, what they actually taught way back in the day. When I was, good Lord, 8 years old, 9 years old, I saw National Geographic that was talking about medieval England. It was talking about knights, and it mentioned that they still make knights. And my thought back as an 8 or 9 year old was, I wonder who teaches them how to use a sword. Do they still have those schools? So then fast forward, when I'm 27 years old or so, that kind of came back to me that I wanted to learn. So I started trying to recreate Saviolo with an epee, which anyone who's studied the historical text will probably now giggle at. And it was almost every bit as bad as you'd think it was, but it did get me hooked on trying to figure out what it was they did, what it was we're trying to recreate, etc. I became good friends with Brian Wilson, Darkwood Armory, when he created the first heavy rapiers, really, that weren't Schlager blades, that weren't the German Schlagers.
Mm-hmm.
And I helped him to bring those to Onsteora. I brought the first ones over, got them approved by the king. So kind of maybe was kind of the godfather of the heavy rapier in Onsteora, which we fought hard for a while until they were generally accepted. Got my white scarf in 99. Didn't actually start learning real decent historical swordplay until after that, because then a translation of Capoferro came out in 2001, or started coming out in 2001. Bill Wilson started working on it along with the Jacques Swinger. So then I just started taking that to the nth degree and trying to figure out what we were doing, and started winning tournaments using the historical techniques, documentable techniques, and then was introduced to cut and thrust and became one of the primary handful of people pushing it around the known world, side sword experiment. We finally got that off the ground, and then I was asked to be the first deputy ANS minister for the society to put together a historical combat track, so that people who wanted to learn various weapon styles that were documentable but that weren't allowed on the field could have a place to do so. So I picked that up. I wrote the rules. I did that for the first few years. In fact, I did it halfway through law school. It was in the middle of law school that I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to hand it off. But yeah, I got a Laurel at my very last event in Onsteora in 2006, right before I went off to law school. And then I kind of disappeared from the world for about 4 years or so because of law school, and then trying to get a job in 2009, 2010. Then I got into the Foreign Service, was assigned to Ottawa. And so I went up there and taught for 2 years, John and Zena's and Larry and some of the people up there, and played. So I've technically lived now in 4 kingdoms. I've fought in 4 kingdoms. I've fought in Western martial arts tournaments. I fought in HEMA tournaments. And I'm still competing every once in a while, mainly just to test my theories, to make sure I didn't lose something, to make sure I'm not a complete idiot. But generally my focus is now I'm really trying to pass on what I understand and what I know of swordplay to others. I really get more pumped when my students win tournaments, honestly, than when I do. And so that's kind of where I've come into now.
That's awesome. That totally makes sense to have that kind of natural transition. Is there, you said you don't really keep track of how many tournaments, but is there like one or two tournaments that you're particularly proud of specifically?
Yeah, so I won Serade's Queen's Champion, the very last Queen's Champion I was able to compete in Ansteora. And that was big for me for a couple of reasons. That was only the second one I'd ever let myself try to win. Every other Queen's Champion from 1997 on, I pulled myself out at the removal stage, with I think one exception, which I actually just simply lost. But because of family life and stuff, we never felt that it was a right time to win and be gone for 6 months and all that. So it was nice in 2005 to actually let myself just go all the way through. And in fact, I showed up at the event, and I was like, I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm going to fight in this, because I knew I was going to law school. I knew it was not too far away. And I got there, and I think Shay had already signed me up. And I was like, well, shit, okay, fine. So I think that was part of the success there, was I showed up and I was relaxed, and I wasn't tense about it. I wasn't really tied up in knots about it. But that was good for me, because I also, on the way of getting there, I beat like 5 other former Queen's champions on the way to the finals. And so that was kind of a validation to me, not only that I really could do it, but I could do a hard one. I could do one that was not a blowover. I guess the other tournament right now that sticks out to me, well, there's some that stick out for fun. I won an Master Aeron tournament in Gulf War with Brendan, because we double killed in the finals, and that was by itself, that was just a hoot. But no, recently I won a gold in cut and thrust in a HEMA tournament. The first time I picked up sword and buckler in a long time, really, for a real tournament. And that was kind of a nice as well. And in fact, that whole tournament series, that was DC Open, I got the award for the best technical performance of all the fighters there. So that was also kind of special, being able to, at age, what was that, 49, I think, not only to win silver and gold in 2 tournaments, but to get the technical award for being the best at what it effectively means is hitting your opponent without ever getting touched back.
Yeah, which is the ultimate goal.
Yeah. So I think those are the 2 that stand out right now. I mean, if I talked on, I'm sure I would find others that have interesting, backstories and stuff. Certainly, I have interesting fights I could talk about.
Well, we will get to watching some of those. We'll go ahead and jump into that now. So I'm going to share my screen. Hold on one second. Share my screen. Okay. Is that showing up?
Yep.
Okay. So we'll just start with this one, I think, is what I wanted to. We'll fast forward through the...
Yeah, fast forward through the parts. The judges will also sit and chat for a while.
Yeah. So usually what I start with is I just want for you to talk about like your on guard stance and like your philosophy. And I'll pause it. Yeah, right here. So like, would you say this is indicative of your normal stance?
Generally, this was a little bit out of practice, but not too bad. And I'm kind of like Miguel. When I watch my videos, all I see is the things I do wrong.
Of course.
So I'll try and avoid that. This isn't too bad. My feet are actually at about 100 degrees. This is effectively a decent corto with a dagger. There's a couple things going on here. One, I knew Iman was going to do this. I had watched her videos before, and she almost always starts in a high prima, approaching, and then snaps down. And I was kind of hoping for it and looking forward to it, but I didn't get it the way I wanted it to in the end, because I didn't feel as comfortable in my position, in my stance. I stick my sword out and I try to control the space between us. It goes back to the conversation that you and I were having a while back about, sword first, body first, whatever. For me, the point is I'm getting the sword out there to control the space between us. That's why my sword goes first. It's not a matter of speed. It's a matter of I get to dictate where she is, on which side of my sword she is. So yeah, this is pretty good. Yeah, I can't say too much negative about this. I've got the dagger up because she's in prima, and I'm trying to control her to be on my inside line at this point in time.
So a lot of there's a lot of fighters who do like the kind of more Italian fencing, right? And a lot of times they hold their dagger farther back than you're holding it, but your dagger's still pretty far forward.
What I try to do is create a V. Usually I'm aiming at my sword, not over it like I am in this picture. So what I try and do is create a V, and that V is protecting my middle line, and it's going to direct anything to my outside lines that's going to come at me. The mistake I see is when you open up, when you go forward and your sword and dagger are both pointing straight at your opponent, because you're basically channeling them straight into you.
Yes. Okay, cool. So I'll play the video a little bit here. Okay, it looks like there was a hit there. We'll slow-mo that real quick.
Yeah, I don't know if there was or not. I don't remember the scores here. I know I won all these fights. A few people did score a couple of points on me. I don't remember if she did or not. But judging in HEMA is notoriously difficult. So sometimes there's a few of these that are very clear, but that one I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, we'll just let it keep going.
Yep. Okay, so that was hitting her on the arm. If I have a signature move, that's it. And if you'll watch, you can't even see it happen. I start off on the inside of her blade, and then as I extend, I've actually done a cavatione, and I'm hitting her arm. So there's the cavatione hit.
Oh yeah, very nice.
Usually I'll try and tie their blade up and hit him in the neck or hit him in the head. That time I didn't quite have the motion on it that I wanted.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
It's what I didn't do well. Usually I'll try and do a slight feint. And so I went so fast, I didn't get her time to react and move her arm out of the way.
So you're trying to draw her arm across her body to the inside and then disengage to the outside and hit her on the outside. Okay, yeah.
Exactly. So I simply straighten the arm right in front of them. And as they're drawing that, in the action of straightening my arm and they're starting to do the parry, I'm just dropping my blade and they're parrying right over it, and I come right back online.
Oh yeah, super nice. My brother Miguel has a very similar move he does, actually.
Yeah, I think he's done it to me a couple times.
So you're definitely fairly low in your stance.
I am against her. She's not a tall person, and what I was trying to do was kind of get under her blade a little bit and come up from underneath. Sometimes I also just simply get excited.
You get lower as you get excited, you think?
Sometimes, yeah. I've got a terza. I've got a terza stance where I'm leaning back and I really get low for a couple of reasons. I can launch out of it pretty well, and people don't know what to do with it really, because my body's way out of the way and I'm really low, and the only target they have there is the leg. And anyone who knows what they're doing knows that that's a trap. You'll also note that since this is HEMA, cuts are legal. So there's a lot of sloppy cutting with rapiers going on here.
I'm gonna skip through the judges' discussion.
You mentioned the V a little bit earlier, and when our group was working through, we were working from Degrassi, which kind of has your blades out to the side the way you mentioned, and we kept finding that center slot was a real problem, and we ended up developing that same solution of bringing the blade across so that it formed that V and kept us protected.
Yeah. I mean, early on, when we were still using epes, there was one particular fighter who liked to try to double kill, because his thought was, if you're the one who initiated the double kill, then you're more likely to win on the second run. And basically you freaked your opponent out. So what I started doing to fight him was, whenever I threw a shot, I would throw a shot across my body and pick his blade up. So before I even started reading the period manuals, I had already figured out gain and slide down the blade and hit with the epee. And then using that V is kind of a different version of that. I'm protecting the line, and as soon as that sword comes at me, all I've got to do is throw my dagger or my sword out, and I've already gained. I've already cleared the middle line.
I will just repeat again. If you have a question, please use the chat.
Oh, right.
There'll be time to use mics at the end, but no problem. I appreciate the question. So let's keep going with this. Seems like she was a little close in some of that.
She was a little close, and I hit her twice, actually. I hit her once over the arm. You can see the bend, and then she keeps fighting because no one called anything, and that's the right thing to do. So I get her right in the torso. Hold on, keep going.
Yeah.
Right. Bam, right there, about her collarbone, and she keeps swinging. So I get her there because I basically picked her up completely and opened her up.
Yeah, when she threw right into your dagger here too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was playing a lot a game of try to get around the weapon, not to try to control the weapon.
Mm-hmm. So you've touched on this a little bit here, but do you generally like to have like a lot of like knowledge about your opponent before you go into the fight and kind of have a plan, or do you more just like to improvise in the moment, or combination, I guess?
I go back and forth, but not much. Usually I would rather go out fresh against someone because even people I know well, if I haven't seen them for 6 or 8 months, they can develop new thoughts and they can work on new techniques. So I prefer to go and play my opponent in the first few seconds to see where their brain is. Or for instance, someone who is really good at a certain shot may not just be feeling it that day. So I may set myself up waiting for their outside, gain, and they're just not feeling it. They just can't get it that day. So I prefer to actually go fairly fresh against most opponents to see where they are in the first few seconds of the fight.
Okay.
And that was a direct shot. So she comes and she stringers my blade. I drop out of the stringer and she doesn't react, so I come straight up the middle.
Yeah. You got even lower in this shot too.
Yep, I got under her point, it looks like.
Yeah, right. It looks like right in the chin, you hit her down the middle.
Yep. And by the way, I was doing all this with a torn right shoulder.
Oh yeah. Little extra points for that, I guess.
Right?
What do you do for like as far as prepping for a tournament? Do you have like certain levels of practice? Does it change depending on like, actually specifically asked like for like an SCA tournament versus a HEMA tournament? I mean, the rules are different, so that could,
right.
But obviously.
For any tournament, if I really want to try and try some things out, I will try to avoid doing any heavy teaching for a couple 2-3 weeks leading up to it. I'll try and focus on my own practice, my own skill for a couple of practices, and then the week before any tournament, I don't practice at all.
Okay.
I don't get in my own head the week before the tournament because what I've found is I don't do warm-up fights either for the same reason. What I found is if I do a warm-up fight, or if I try to practice, if I go to a practice the week before and I do well, I go in with a little too much confidence, and I find that I'm not as well, or I'm not as good in the tournament. If I do poorly, then I can psych myself out. So I just try to give myself a good 7 days of not fighting, and the first time I'll fight in a tournament that I kind of care about will be the very first fight that I have in that tournament.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I don't do warm-up fights for tournaments either for a similar reason. It's also I think of it as a variable. You can't control how the person is going to interact with you in that fight, and so I'd rather just not worry about it at all.
Yep.
So looks like a lefty in this fight.
Yep, this is Ryan. He's a lefty. He's down in southern Atlanta.
Do you have any different approach for left-handed fighters?
Only a little. So understanding that when I was in Houston, my school of about 8 to 12 students, 3 or 4 of them were always lefty. So we trained left and right-handed. So lefties don't freak me out much. The thing I try to do to them is I try and get on the outside of their blade, because lefties always want to control their left side. And if I can get on the outside of their blade and glide down it, I'm golden. If I can't, then I'm usually occupying them so much I can throw down the inside. I'll try and take their outside, and then they'll do a disengage, and that gives me a good tempo to try and get them. And I think I get Ryan that way a couple times.
Yeah, it looks like he
right there.
Yeah, he throws down the center, and yeah, parry him down and hit him. Looks like the arm.
Yeah. So again, I was fussing with this blade, and I was making him have to make a decision that he didn't want to make, and then he just threw at my open body, which my dagger was there for.
Yeah, one thing people don't realize or don't think about is anything a lefty can do to you, you can do to them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's the same fight.
And I engage the blade. I tend to ignore the dagger. So for that, lefties are really good for me, because I don't even want to think about the dagger. With a right-hander, I try to get on their outside so I can just ignore the dagger altogether. Mm-hmm. With the lefty, I can keep them thinking so much about their sword, because they're fighting for that outside line, that their dagger almost never comes into it.
How do you mean ignore the dagger? I guess elaborate on that.
I see a lot of people spending a lot of time trying to get around the dagger with their sword. And the dagger the dagger doesn't harm me at all. I'm trying to protect their sword from hitting me. And in order for their dagger to hit me, I have to have done something very wrong. They have to have closed a lot on me, right? I think you were saying this during Dom's thing. So I am just going to engage the blade as much as I can. And if I'm doing my job, when I engage the blade, I'm going to try and hit them in that side, in their ribs, underneath the sword arm. Mm-hmm. Or somewhere up that area, because you start parrying across your own arm and you run into all kinds of troubles.
That makes perfect sense to me, actually. So I like in this fight how you're controlling the ring, right, the space, because you're backing him up, like he's on the edge of the field at this point.
Yep. And I'm doing so safely because I've got him controlled. I've got him stringered, and I'm pushing him back, and he's not sure how he wants to handle it.
But then right here, when he comes forward, you have all of this space to back up to.
Yeah, well, but also look at the tempo though. So back that up just slightly. I'm controlling his blade. He has no straight shot to me. So for him to do anything, he has to do 2 tempos. That gives me all I need to start backing up as soon as his blade starts coming forward.
Yeah. And I think there's a hit right here.
Yeah. Yep. I pick up his blade over my arm with the dagger and hit him right up the ribs.
Watch it one more time real quick. Oh yeah.
Oh, actually neck. Yeah. Upper shoulder, something.
And he kind of gave you his blade without really doing much with it.
Basically, he extended without stepping at all. Yeah. And you'll note behind, in the white and the black, Loda and his student is the third one I fight here. So we'll get to him. That was an interesting dynamic.
Do you think that, how do you think the period sources combined with sort of the SCA's own like culture of fighting mixed with your approach, right? Like, because and this is what I find is that like someone does, if they're studying a period manual, they're still influenced by the kingdom they're in. So in a sense, you were doing Capoferro, but with the Onsteuern background, per se. Do you agree with that, or would you say that's not true?
I would say it's time bound, honestly. Mm-hmm. So I was doing Capoferro because that's what William and Jurek were working on, and I looked at it and I thought this is kind of what we should be doing. After I had gotten into Capoferro and Dall'Agocchie, people started looking at Meyer, and you've got some of the people up in the mid that started looking at the German stuff. So you can actually look at, and then Puck brought a lot of the Spanish for it.
The Spanish, yeah.
You can actually, up to a point, I mean, it's gotten a little bit more mucky now, but up to a point, you can look at how someone was fighting and kind of tell when they started getting interested in historical swordplay, because they got interested in the one that was kind of sexy at the time. A lot of the Fabers fighters all started getting interested in it right after Tom published his first Fabers book. So you can trace John O'Meara and stuff, their history back to the publication of that book is what really grabbed them. So I would say it's more time bound than it is place bound, but it is also place bound because the ones who get good at it have someone who kind of walks through it with them. And so you've got to have someone there. A lot of the Fabers fighters I've seen come out of Tim Lyon's tutelage, Logos up in Mid-Realm. And he did a great job understanding Fabers right out the gate, and people have come from that. A lot of the fighters I got rolling, or took my classes first, have stayed with Capoferro. You've got Wistrick. I think one of my classes was the first he ever took on historical stuff, and he got hooked on it. So yeah, you can kind of see influences that way, but I do think it has more to do with when you got interested.
Okay, that makes sense. We'll play this back some real quick. Looks like you throw a cut.
Yep.
He voids it.
I step back in and come right up underneath him.
Oh yeah.
And I still have the scar from that cut on my leg that he did. That is the only point he got. And he landed right between my metal knee. Well, actually, I didn't have lower legs on. So he landed right underneath my metal kneecap and left a big old gash.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was straight tempo. I occupied his blade and just shot in whenever he lifted his blade up.
Yeah.
As you're supposed to.
Yeah, there's a lot of, almost most of the period masters say if someone tries to throw a cut at you, just stab them while they're doing it.
Exactly. And I think this is the end of that fight.
It looks like it. Yeah. Okay. We'll go to the next one.
All right. So this is Loda's student. This is Paolo. And what you'll see here is he was trying to freak me out. He was doing some weird low saber things, and I just kept him at wide range and was just like, okay, I'm waiting for you to actually fight me, Then he picked it up. Bang. So I finally got him to pick it up. I threw a cut that he blocked with his cup, and then just straight in, right into his face.
Yeah, that was very nice.
One of the things you'll start seeing throughout this entire fight, he corrects it somewhere near the middle, but he gets into the habit of throwing his right arm out. So for the first half of this fight, a lot of my technique is just to occupy his right arm because he's gonna open up his chest.
I think he also is kind of hanging out at a little close range for him without really making an offensive action.
He's not engaging my blade at all while he's in narrow measure, basically.
Yeah. I kind of have a theory that a lot of times people get hit is because of a lack of measure awareness. They were at a place at a bad measure without making the correct action at that measure, and that's how most hits happen.
You're not wrong. I mean, I could go on. I could derail this entire video by talking. I mean, I've got some major theories about that very subject. But I'll say this: the vast majority of the decent fighters in the SCA have only mastered tempo and measure. They haven't mastered the third fundamental that well. But you can go far with just being really good at tempo and measure, because all you're doing is controlling when you're going in and then going in at just the right moment.
Do you want to say what the third fundamental is, just for people who might not know?
The third fundamental, I'll describe it like this. You're trying to control three things when you're fighting. You're trying to control the distance, you're trying to control the timing, and you're trying to control the space between the two of you. I'll say a sword master does, because clearly not everyone does all three. But those are the three controls that you're trying to apply if you're really good at sword play. And you control the distance by using measure, by controlling your measure and their measure. You control the tempo in various ways, tied also to measure. But controlling the space between you is usually blade work. So the third fundamental is learning how to use the weapon in your hand, learning how to use it to block off angles, to create angles, and that kind of thing.
I very much agree with that. Okay.
So again, he chased me down. I got him to raise his arm like extremely and hit him right under the arm.
It went back a little too far. Oh yeah, throws that arm way out. It's that wide.
Yep.
So would you say that is kind of something you generally will look for if you're fighting someone, like tendencies they would have that you could then capitalize on later on in the fight, or in a match like this where you have multiple passes with the same opponent?
I'll talk about it like this. I don't think in terms of sentences when I'm fighting.
Mm-hmm.
What I'll think is in terms of visuals and geometry. So probably in this fight, and I don't remember my point of view from this fight very well. Probably from this fight, I started just seeing that white of his chest, of the under the arm chest. And that kind of helped me zoom in on, okay, I can get him to move his sword and reveal that. So that's generally how I tend to think about fighting in the moment. So I'm not having to process stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just seeing the geometry of the angles and the lines, and oh, look, a target opened up and I'm angling for it and that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah. I think it's a good way of putting it, actually. I think, and you're kind of hitting on this. I think sometimes fighters, high-end fighters, will use a shorthand. They're like, "Oh, I saw him do this, and so I did this to provoke that action, hit them." It's like it doesn't really work that way. That's too slow.
Right.
But we might say it just to if I was talking to someone just to describe what happened, because it kind of is what happened, but it's more subconscious than that, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, Gage kind of summed that up really well after Lord Baltimore's challenge at one point. He came up to me and he was kind of laughing. He said, who did he get? I think he got either Devin or he got I can't remember. Anyway, maybe Devin. But he was laughing because he's like, "Oh my God, he made me sound like a sword expert." Because a good director will break down what happened. Well, first he did this, and then he replied, and then he replied, and whatever. And the point that I'm making here is that is all words you lay on the action after the fact. In order to get the action in the first place, you can't think about that. You have to be processing at a higher speed or at a more efficient speed.
Yeah, I've had someone, an opponent or a spectator, tell me, they're like, "Oh man, you set that up so perfectly. You like did this and this, and then you hit them." And I was like, "Oh yeah, I definitely." It's like, no, I just hit them. I didn't really. It was too quick. It's like, I appreciate that you think that I'm some sort of genius for setting that up. But
well, and when we get to Torsa's video, I'll show you something I did there that I didn't know I did until I was watching it afterwards. So yeah.
Oh yeah, I've had that experience too. He's definitely kind of settled down a little bit in this.
Yeah. Yep. But he's still not protecting himself. He's still just sticking his sword out. Yeah.
Well, I would say he's kind of not sticking his sword out. His guard is very close. Both of his hands are very close to his body.
No, you're right. You're right. His hand is closed. His sword's pointing at me, but his hand is closed. You're correct. So he is really... he's letting me get into a nice range for me.
Yeah. I mean, I fight with my sword hand farther back, but I don't. Then I also have to keep my dagger more forward to compensate for that, and he's not doing either.
Sure, but I've also pulled your sword and Mike's sword out in front of you because of that.
I've come to more of an adjustment of the situation where I want my sword to be.
Yep.
I'm gonna go back 1 second. I think this is a great example of your V you were talking about, like a really solid hands, both very protective.
So I've got the V, and I'm aiming my sword at his sword shoulder. So I'm actually crossing that line and stringering him. And as you'll see, I one-shot him this time, and I gain his sword on the attack.
But I think you've sort of stringered him with both of your hands, I think, with the dagger and with the...
Kind of, yeah. I may have caught him in kind of this little crossover, yeah.
Yeah. Little double tap here.
Yeah, he takes a step back and removes his sword, but then I regain it and hit him in opposition.
Yeah. And then a second time for good measure.
Right. Because we don't self-call in this tournament.
Yeah. Well, even if this was an SCA tournament, until you've heard him say good, you should keep hitting him.
That's true.
And I've often hit people sometimes twice and then be like, oh, I'm sorry for the second hit, but it was already loaded up.
So something also to be aware of here. This was a series of pretty clean fights in HEMA, and let me tell you why. The dude in the middle is David Rowe. He was a teacher at VAF. Now that VAF has collapsed, he's doing his own thing. The guy on the right with the glasses and the bluish shirt, he's a mod up in Ethelmark.
Okay.
The guy straight across behind Piolo, he is a teacher up in MKDF, I believe. And then I think the guy on the left also has a lot of experience. So this is more experience than you would see around most HEMA rings. And so it was really pretty clean, and I was really happy with all the calls here. I've had others that were like, what in the living hell just happened?
Yeah.
And I could go on about those too.
I've watched some videos of HEMA fights where I was like, that's not what happened.
The metal helm is a problem, actually. I've had points called against me because someone rattled against the helm.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
Don't they also doesn't the metal helm kind of also make them a little nervous from like a safety perspective?
Some of them are. I have never had anyone deny it. But the only problem I've had so far is with the clanking. A lot of people love it. This was a Long Point, and like a half dozen people approached me and were like, oh my God, that's amazing. I love that.
It's a nice helm.
But usually what I'll do is I'll write the people who are arranging it, and I'll say, this is my helm. And Brian Caswell and I both were doing this. This is my helm. This is my gear. Here's a picture of me wearing it. Are you going to have a problem with this? So we kind of get pre-permission before we go to any of these HEMA tournaments for that reason.
Makes sense. Okay, we'll jump to, so we'll go back to an SCA tournament.
So this was a Queen's Champion on a postage stamp is what this was.
And this is now Master Torse.
Right.
From Atlantia. It's another lefty.
Yeah, so I won't spoil it right now, but I'll line it up for you in a minute. Okay, so this is a great example of me building up a shot. It took me 4 times to try and get to the shot. So the very first one.
So go back to the beginning of the fight?
Yeah, go back to the beginning. Okay. The very first one is me seeing where Torse's head is. I fire for his hand, and he pulls it back and up. Okay, so now I've set where his mind is at that point in time. Then I fire for his hand a little deeper, and I see him crossing above me. Okay, parry that thing away. All right. But when he does that, he opens his belly. He opens his lower belly up. So this one's going to be draw the shot, try to parry it across, and try to hit that open belly. But I don't quite get it. There's trying to get the belly right there. Missed it entirely. So then this 4th try, I go ahead and run him down, and I get that belly.
But you're right, he responded to your attacks the same way every time.
Every time.
He's very consistent with that.
Yep. So I knew where his sword was going to be each time. Somewhere in there, he whacks me with a dagger, and we had a discussion about whether he hit me, and I don't ever think I felt point on it. But yeah, he
Yeah,
made he made that mistake of basically doing the same attack each time I threw something at
Well,
him.
he has a very. I fought Taurus a lot of times over the years. He has a very automatic. If you throw at him, he pulls his sword up to the left, and then brings the dagger in.
Yep. And anyone who's that automatic, you got something on them.
Yeah.
You may not be able to score it, but you got it.
Most people just eat the blade in the side of their head because he covers and throws that hand over.
Right.
But
right. But you've even got, for instance, Alessandro. Jay, when I throw for his sword hand, he will do the same thing. He'll pull it back and up, even though he's a right-hander. But in order to get Jay, I have to have a third or fourth intention. I have to throw for the hand, throw for the body, avoid the dagger, block his sword, and hit him in the head or the neck. So it's not always, I'm not always tight enough to get in on Alessandro for that reason.
Yeah. So we'll go to the next one, which I think is with, now
All right.
Master Boomy. Yeah. So this is actually when you lose.
Ladies and gentlemen, here's what happens in this fight. So I had just beaten Boomy, but we were out in the grass. So it had started raining, and the Queen pulled the semifinals and quarterfinals underneath this little bitty pavilion, which we kind of roped off with these picnic tables. So I had just had my way with him, kind of, but on my own terms, being able to control distance. So here you'll see me set up, and as he's throwing the final shot, my head goes, "Oh fuck, he's too close." And he also pulls his sword back. When we were fighting in the grass, he was holding it out, but now look at him.
Yeah, it's very tactical.
Yeah, he's pulled it back, and he doesn't want me to grab it now. So he played the smarter card here.
Yeah, he looks kind of like me, actually.
A little bit.
Well, he probably pulled it back because there was less space, right?
Yeah.
I bet. I mean,
well, less space, and because he's slightly taller than I am, he has the same reach at least. So yeah, he and I can both launch a lunge and go all the way across the space we had.
Yeah, I hate fighting on small fields, though. So.
Oh my God. Octavia's Queens, the one that I lost, was a postage stamp. I could stand in one corner and hit the bar on the other corner with my lunge.
Okay.
All right, this is me and Jeremy, me and Dominique. Finals of Surfo Sword and Dagger. A couple notable things. This is me extremely tired, and I think Jeremy was kind of tired too, but he was a little bit better shape. But you'll start seeing my form fall apart, and that's what he takes advantage of at the end.
I didn't know about this video, otherwise I would have showed this when I was interviewing Dom. But
I'm glad you didn't.
Also, he doesn't have a stick.
Exactly. He had to bring dagger, which he's clearly not bad with.
A dagger and a stick are pretty similar.
Yeah. But he uses it differently. He uses his dagger differently than he uses his stick. So what happens here, it's hard. I can't even see it. I've slowed it down 100 times. We do a double kill. We both get body shots.
Yeah.
Right there.
Okay, yeah. It looks like his blade. I think that's his blade.
Yeah, he's got one on me, and I think I've got one right under his arm.
Your blade is here. Yeah, I think. It's hard to tell, but yeah. It's an interesting angle. I haven't watched a lot of fights from this like down perspective. I kind of like it. Just for a change of pace.
Yeah.
And this is in Atlanta, right? The HEMA tournament in Atlanta.
This is Atlanta. This was my third tournament for the day. And one thing to note, my form falls apart the tighter I get. I think everyone's like that. But you'll see my foot turning in.
Yeah.
And you'll see I start jabbing. I'm no longer using good sword control. I'm just kind of throwing things out there. So what I'm trying to now do is just control measure and tempo because my blade control is almost gone. What happened there is we closed and I hit him in the arm with the dagger, I believe. No, that's not it. No, this was a nothing burger. The next exchange where one of us scores is me hitting him in the arm with the dagger. Ah, that was it. That was it. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. I'll slow mo real quick. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So he got both of his blades on either side of me, and I closed in and got his arm. And so here's the tournament mindset at this point. I remember this pretty clearly. The scoreboard was over here behind Jeremy, which has the time on it. And I remember very clearly thinking 27 seconds. I can stall this for 27 seconds and have the win, because my brain was like, you're not going to carry this on for a while. But that went by pretty quick, because part of me was like, well, what fun would that be? Fuck that. Pardon my French.
No, it's fine.
So now, okay, so that was him getting me. None of the judges saw it. But what happens, if you want to back it up a little bit, my sword is completely in reserve. So I am just simply using my dagger. I'm flinging my dagger around because I'm tired. And what Jeremy does is he throws a few shots at my dagger and he gets me to lift it. And then one of the final shots was throwing for the dagger and just coming right under. And he barely touched my belly button. I could have gotten away with not calling it, but it was there. And it was a beautiful shot right there.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think he even bent blade. I just barely felt the very end of that sword hitting me.
Yeah. He likes those kind of weird angles like that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. But no,
So,
it was beautifully done.
So one thing, and since we just watched some fights, I always have this question of what do you think your weaknesses are? Like if you were going to give someone advice how to beat you, what would you tell them?
One of my
tired maybe, but
yeah, tired is one way. One of my weaknesses is I try to sometimes get too caught up in getting the perfect action. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I will, I mean, if you think the Seven Samurai, you know, they had the one samurai that all he wanted was to have the perfect sword fight. And of course he dies. So I kind of have that same mindset. I don't want to just win a fight. Winning a fight isn't a thing for me that's important. Winning a fight because I did all the things correctly, because I set it up the way I wanted it to and pulled it off the way I wanted it to. That is my goal. And it's been that way for a while. And I've done that for a few reasons, one of which is managing your own expectations. You're not going to win every fight, but you can still have won your win condition, right?
Yeah.
But also, early on when I was learning Capoeira, I was kind of a bit of a jerk. I would beat people and walk out the field and tell them what plate to go look up that I beat them with. And I was kind of doing that as look what I did to you, because ego. But I was also doing that because at that point, no one believed historical swordplay would work. And so I was kind of like, look, I just set you up in a way that comes straight out of a manual, and you went for it, and I did it. So that kind of became the thing that I continually want to do. Is I want to control the chess match, not just win the fight. That's a good way to say it. Just control the chess match itself. So yeah, you can get inside my own head as I'm trying to actually control the chess match. And if you're a very physical, very natural fighter, sometimes that works out pretty well.
Okay. So on the flip side of that, what do you think has been, and we've touched on some of this before, but what do you think has like been the key to your success? Like what do you do that's better than other people?
That's an interesting question. Early on, it was the fact that I was a drummer for my entire life. So my wrists were pretty amazing. I was hitting white scarves almost out of the gate with circle movements around their swords. Understanding forte, understanding how to control the space between us. I can fight someone who has a better control of tempo than me, but because I can control the space between us better, I can force my tempo on them. So for me, being able to create the space that I want is a strength. I see a lot of people who And so I will break down sometimes sword play into three things. One is the beginning sword fighter, which is they're trying really hard to get around your blades, to find a way around your defenses and your blades. A second level is they're trying to draw you in on their time. And this is a lot of the Black Tigers will do this. You know, they'll refuse a sword, they'll have the dagger, and they're going to try and draw you into their target. So they're opening up an invitation, and they're going to try and defend that invitation. What I'm trying to do is that, but force the issue. I'm trying to close the lines and force you to take that invitation. I'm not just waiting for it. I'm trying to make it happen on my terms. So I think if I have a strength, that's kind of the strength I try and play with. And I'm trying to play with it more. I'm actually trying to develop it more because I still play where I stop and play swords as opposed to just close, just continually close and try and force my opponent. You've got 2 seconds to make a decision or else you're dead, basically.
That makes sense.
So this was interesting, by the way. I'll throw this out there. And this is an SCA thing. I've done this before. None of the judges called that last shot. Mm-hmm. I called my own shot. Some HEMA tournaments don't let you call your shots. But one of the things that went through my head very quickly, right after Jeremy hit me, you'll see me back up and you'll see me pause for a second. And one of the things that did go through my head was this crew needs to see someone losing a fight because he chooses to. Because these are all HEMA fighters and they all wait for the judge to tell them who won. And I wanted them to understand that I gave that fight to Jeremy. I did not have to claim that loss, but I did because he was a cleaner fighter. He did a better job than I did, and he earned it. I did this, actually several of us, me and if you guys know James Clock, Christian up from Mid-Realm, and Brian Wilson. We fought in one of the first Western Martial Arts, WMA tournaments called ISMAC in 2004 or 5. And we had 5 maestros that were judging it. So they were very skilled judges, but they still missed things. We started calling the things against us like you do in the SCA. And it made an impact. The next year we had a very similar tournament with the similar judges or the same judges. And the lead judge, Martinez, made this big speech where he said, last year was the most honorable tournament I've ever seen. And I would love to see that continue. And so it was like, yes, we are kind of making a difference. We want people to understand that we're not gamifying this. We're trying to play this. We're trying to be the best fighter. We're not trying to be the one who wins, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'll add to that real quick because I think sometimes, so I'm a very competitive person, a fighter. So, but that means that if I am hit, I lost.
Yep.
So I could not call, if I didn't call the blow, I might still win. I might go, walk off the field as the declared victor, but I would know that I hadn't won. And so that's garbage to me. Exactly. I don't want that. I wanted to win the fight, and so I don't want my opponent to have touched me.
Yep. And
so if the goal is to be skilled and to win, and I am competitive, and I do want to even like beat my opponent, right? Like that's something that I some people don't care about that, but like I want to be better than my opponent when I fight them. And the only way I can do that is to hit them without them hitting me. And so that's no reason to, if a judge didn't miss a shot or I didn't call a blow, that would not be acceptable. Precisely. I would rather lose and acknowledge the loss and then go and work on the problem I had and come back to the tournament and hopefully be better for that loss.
Yep.
So I totally agree with you on that. And anyone who's truly competitive should feel the same way, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, a real snarky way of saying it is, do you want to be the winner of the fight or do you want to be the best fighter on the field? Yes. Because sometimes you can choose one or the other.
So this is the last fight I think I had, and I throw this up on YouTube. It might have, the quality is not great, but
yeah. So this is 2005. This is Jason Serrade, Serrade's Queen's Champion, and this is me and Edward Mercer. So Edward, up until not too long before this, he was kind of the bugbear in my head. We all have that one fighter who just crawls into our head and kind of camps out there. So he was there for a good while. And in this tournament, I beat him once with a shot to the face. So now we're here in the finals. You will notice even then, I'm controlling the line. I'm trying
Yeah.
really hard to keep his sword from having a straight line to me. One of the things he would do, that he did me a few times, is he would drop that point like that, but then he'll pop it back up into my face if I don't back up. So you'll see me taking a step back several times with him.
I loved being able to watch this, even though the quality's not great, but it's fun to watch something back from before I played.
This is actually the event that I've met my now wife at. So.
Oh, well,
it has
a good day for you, I guess.
It has extra things, yeah.
A nice lunge by him.
Yep.
How many queens had he won at this point, at this happening?
I think if he had won this one, I believe this would have been his fourth at the time. I can't remember, third or fourth, but yeah, he'd already won a couple or three.
A couple, yeah. He's won 6 now, so
yeah,
he's the second most in on tour.
Boom.
We'll see if slow with that. I don't know. See how much we can see.
So it's interesting rewatching this, because in my head, he stopped.
Nice
he stopped too early in my head.
Yeah.
But he actually is set up, so he just simply misjudged my range.
Yeah. Well, I think what you're doing here, and this is a kind of a sneaky trick that a lot of upper end fighters do, is you look like you're about to set, right? Like you're going to set and start the fight, but instead you just lunge.
Right. Now you're right. And here's the other thing about this. This is one of those shots I do not remember. I don't remember seeing it.
Oh,
I don't remember throwing it. It was just there and my body went for it.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing I remember from this is, if you let it go for a second, he hits my hand right there as he drops. And that's why I dropped the dagger. And that's the first thing I remember, is dropping that dagger. And then I remember being in stance and going, okay, what just happened? Okay. And kind of going through all the checks in my head where you're like, do I feel points somewhere? Did I miss something? You know?
Yeah. Very cool. Yeah, I hadn't got a chance to meet Edward for a long time because he really wasn't playing when I first started. But then he came back to a few events more recently. He's a cool dude.
He's a natural athlete. He's fantastic. He's also one of the most fair and most fun fights I've had.
Oh yeah.
He and I would play, and we would play for 3 or 4 minutes without throwing a shot, because we're playing the chess game. We would cross blades and we would try and take advantages and stuff and laugh at each other the whole time. So what happened here is I hit him on the shoulder joint. And so he's trying to figure out whether it was arm or body. And finally he's like, in fact, he even said, this is taking too long. You won. So he's like, if I can't immediately decide whether it was arm or body, then you won that fight.
And that's to emphasize the point you just made a second ago about honor and being the better fighter, obviously.
Yeah. So that was one of my favorite fights in tournaments, just for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was wanting it. He was wanting to win that one, and he sat there thinking through it really hard.
Yeah. Watch it one more time.
Yeah.
Apparently he won LC earlier that year.
Yeah, so I had just come off of winning Steps Warlord, which tends to be the you win that, you go on to win Queens a lot of times.
Used to be. Not really anymore, unfortunately. Okay, so that's all the videos I had. So if people have any questions, they want to turn their mics on, discuss anything, or anything else, we can open that up for some discussion time.
Has anyone put in snarky chats?
I thought I was keeping an eye on the chat, unless I missed a bunch of stuff.
So Avery asks, can I mention
miss
the comment that Edward makes after the final shot? The only thing I remember is, and you can turn it up and you can hear it on the video. I hit him, he drops, he goes to his knees, and that's when he tells me, I was like, I said, make this a good fight, Edward. I didn't want to win for a crap reason, right? So I think that's when he's like shoulder, and he was hitting on his shoulder, and then he stood up and came and talked to me, and he said, you got me right in the joint, and then he said, this is taking too long, and that's when we shook hands. That's what I remember. Avery, if you remember something else, let me know.
Now, basically, I was sitting about 8 feet to your left or to your right in this picture here. And he said it loud enough that from where we were sitting, we heard him, he comes up to you and you guys are talking a little bit. And then he takes like a half step back and loudly says, "No, if I have to think about it that long, it's good."
Yeah.
And, I had just gotten my white scarf, I think, at this point. It was either right before or right after. And, you could watch all of the cadets watching everything just going, oh, that's what it's about. It's not just about, walking off the field with the cards and winning the fight.
Yeah.
And yeah, bravo to Edward for it. But that fight was just gorgeous to watch. You were absolutely, for the time, you were the textbook for Capoferro that we knew. And Edward was the textbook Degrassi that we knew at that moment. And it was watching a period fight. It was gorgeous. Thank you.
So I want to apologize. I somehow thought I was checking the chat, and I totally wasn't. And so there was a bunch of questions in the chat that I did not read. So if people want to ask those questions verbally now, or I can try to look back on some of it. Someone says, how often do you utilize probing attacks?
How often do I use I mean, quite a bit if I don't know my opponent. I will stay at range and I will throw probing attacks for a few reasons. One, to see how good their hand is, to see how fast their reactions are. Two, to see if they know their measure. If I'm at the very edge of my measure and someone's shorter than me, if I throw a quick shot at their hands and they back up fast, then I know where their energy is. Their energy is behind them. They're going to be backing up. They're probably not going to be advancing on me much. So I will use probing shots a lot to feel out where my opponents, even if I know my opponent, I'll try and feel out where they are in the moment. I'll try and see where their brain is. Because I mean, I'll go to a tournament one weekend and my body will be clicking, my tactics are clicking. I'll go 2 weekends later and I'm somewhere off in Mars and, I'm just not reacting the way I should. So that's why I say I don't tend to watch people's fights that much to judge what they do. Because even I will change from one game to the other, and you'll have to try me out to see where my head is at the moment. So that's what the probing shots do.
How much of your success in a fight do you attribute to creativity in the moment or coming up with something to beat them versus just a rock solid application of fundamentals? It's a good question.
That's an interesting question. So, okay, so this Queen's Champion, one of the things I used to say about it is about half of the fights of this Queen's Champion, I was completely in control and I won because I controlled them. The other half were oh shit moments. However, those oh shit moments were trained, that there were things that I had worked on that kept me alive. So even when I have to improvise, even when I have to make something up on the fly, there is still a bit of my training in there. There's still a bit of staying tight, of controlling the blade, of not letting them have the inside line. So one of the things I talk about with solo training, solo drilling, is you want to do a lot of solo drilling because when you're starting to work on tactics, you don't have time to think about whether your lunge is working correctly, whether your knee is over your toe, how your hand is working. So you do solo drilling and add a little bit of chaos, don't always do the exact same shot over and over again, so that when you get to where you're practicing with someone, you can start thinking in connected chunks. And as an example, my lunge is a 3-part lunge. Arm, hinge at the hips, bend at the knee. However, I can do it all in one motion, and all I have to do in my head is simply think, lunge, think of the letter L and I lunge. And that allows me to think tactics. That allows me to then not have to worry about what's happening. I know that I can just drop into a good lunge with my knee over my toe and my sword in opposition. So while some of the things I do, sometimes I feel like oh my God, that was an improvised motion. But if you go back and look at it, no, that was something I'd done in practice before. That was something that I had worked on. I just had to pull it out of my butt really fast and make it work really well. So yeah, that's the way I would describe it. And this is why we practice. This is why we do thousands of attacks and lunges and in various ways and forms.
I think I don't remember who first said this, but it was the more I practice, the luckier I get.
Yeah. No, and that is quite true. Understanding how to apply tactics, understanding the tactics themselves is one thing. Being able to do them in the moment takes practicing your motions over and over again and building them into your body, building them into yourself. And like I said, this last shot between me and Edward, I don't remember throwing it. That means my brain saw something and my body did something that I did not mentally make it do. It happened because it was there and I'd done it before. And if you'll also notice, so if you want to back up real quick on this one, something I developed a long time ago, and this is why he hit my hand and not my stomach. As I go into the lunge, as soon as my front foot lands, my back foot is swiveling behind me and I do a sideways swivel. And this is something I have done for years.
Oh, yeah.
And it removes the center mass from any kind of reconnection. So he threw for my center mass as soon as I threw for him, or as soon as he started stropping. But my hand is the only thing that's there because I had just moved my hips out of the way. So that was a training. And I didn't even know I was training it. I noticed it a few years before this, I was doing it. And then I just kept doing it.
Someone said that you have a Aikido background. Is that true?
I have Shotokan, 4.5 years of Shotokan. And then I spent like probably 8 months working some Aikido into it.
And they want to know how much of that carries over into your rapier.
It carries over into side sword a little bit. But there is one movement, one plate out of Capoferro that I do that is very Aikido. And there's kind of a story that goes behind this, and it includes Edward. There is an action, a plate in Capoferro, where you give an opening, your opponent comes at the opening, you sweep down with the dagger, and you pick him up on the low line, and then your sword it crosses over their dagger as they're trying to lift their dagger to parry, and you hit in the neck or the head. Okay, so you are doing kind of this twisted, what I would consider something of a turning Aikido-like motion. There was a guy in a Queen's Champion who got pretty far when he shouldn't have, if you guys know what I mean.
Yes.
And I got drawn against him, and I had watched him a couple times and saw how he was getting far. And so I got drawn against him. I was walking out to the field, and Edward was sitting under his tent, and he says, "Hey, Aaron." And I closed in on him, and he says, "He's not calling much. You want to be careful." And I was like, "Okay, yeah. I saw that. So I put my sword on Edward's forehead, and I said, "I'm going to hit him right here." So I was being a really cocky jerk. So I go out on the field, and I see how the guy's moving, and I thought, hey, I can pull this exact plate off. So I open up my bottom line. I raise my sword a little bit. I show him my ribs, and sure enough, he comes barreling in on it. So I parry him down, and I hit him on the side of his mask. So as I walk off the field, Mercer's like, "Dude, you missed by 4 inches." And I was like, "Oh man, the flames."
Oh man.
But yeah, so that I do see those Aikido type moves where I'm kind of bending like a reed in the wind. I'm letting my opponent's power go by me while letting him walk onto my sword.
Just don't use your dive and roll abilities when fencing.
Shut up. I broke my collarbone on a kill once. Yes.
Yeah, I've heard that story actually.
Yeah.
So something I think I had written down to ask was, what advice, because I see a lot of people who are trying to do period fighting, right? They studied a period manual, and they end up being very like, "Oh, look, I'm standing like the plate," right? And they don't have any of that kind of flow from plate to plate.
Right.
What advice would you give someone to not fall into that trap, I think?
So to throw one group under the bus, there was an early video of Side Sword by John Clements. which was hilarious because even then I knew it was ridiculous. And John and some other guy were under a tree, and they would start in 2 different Marazzo poses, and then fling swords at each other, and then end in 2 different Marazzo poses. Actually, Academy Duello just presented something that I thought was a very interesting and a good idea, and that is to practice your stance. Practice your stance and make it deeper than you used to. So really push it and exaggerate it and hold it. Then practice the end of your lunge or the end of your attack and do the same thing. Push it deeper, make it exaggerated. Then it's just a matter of connecting those 2 points. Your attack comes from that extended guard to the forward leaning action, and there's a little more nuance to it than that. But effectively, from one guard to the next, you just have to have good blade action to make it work. And I'm thinking cutting, I'm thinking thrusting, but it does help. I mean, the stance isn't going to save you. You have to understand how the blades are supposed to be working. You have to understand why you're standing in that stance. So don't just look at the pictures. Really read the manual, and if you can, find someone who understands the manual itself and understand what's going on, because it took us, let me think about this, it took us probably 7 or 8 years before we really understood what was going on in Capoferro, and we're still learning. We're still translating things that are giving us new nuance on what was happening and on what they're expecting of us. And in fact, I'm going to be giving a podcast interview next week. I don't know when he's going to release it, where I'm going to absolutely redefine what the stringere is for some people. So, we're still making this stuff work, and we're still understanding it more and more.
Awesome. Any other questions? And remember, you can turn your mic on now if you would like, if anyone has anything else to say. So you said this is something else I had written down to talk about. You have talked a lot about you talked at the beginning about how teaching was really more of your focus these days. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that, or specific students that you've like successes students have had, or just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. One of the things that I've been able to do well, I think this is partially, well, I don't know if it's because I was a technical writer or if I was a technical writer because of this, but I'm able to kind of understand concepts and put them in new lights in many ways. And so for me, I enjoy the chess game a lot. I enjoy having the theories, trying to set up the theories in my head of how this is supposed to work, and then making them work so that I know, yep, that worked. That was the way I was thinking of it. So kind of setting up a hypothesis and testing it and pulling it out. So I had a student early on who got really bugged by the fact that I could win a tournament and then spend a week dwelling on the fact that I didn't do the things I wanted to do, that I wasn't as successful to myself as I wanted to be. And he was always like, but you won. And ask Alessandro about this guy. Alessandro hated him. He wasn't my student for very long. But that kind of highlighted the 2 different approaches, one being but you won, so you just let it go. And then me being, no, this is an academic thing for me. This is me trying to figure out how it worked, and in your own words, John, so I can make it work even better next time. So I can keep growing it and keep making it work in different situations. And in fact, I think I'm going off topic here, but in fact, my Houston practice, we didn't do any free fighting. We spent 2 hours on a Sunday doing drills. And then I told all my students, go to the Houston practice, try out what we learned, and come back and let's see where it fell apart. And let's try and work on it again. And let's see what happened. And that was really an ideal setup, where we were doing the academic drills and kind of going at speed, but in drills in my driveway. And then they would go out and try them out against the SCA fighters who, fought in all manner of way. And so you could see, do I really have the outside line? Do I have it against someone who pulls his sword all the way back to his hip? And it gave you this kind of a gut check on, okay, if I fight someone who's fighting Capoferro, I know exactly how to work, but how do I make that work against this person who holds their sword straight up? What do I do against that guy, So anyway, I'm not sure I answered your question. I kind of babbled on for a minute there.
You kind of almost answered my previous question more thoroughly
Okay. Okay.
about the pitfalls of approaching a period style.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. So I mean, okay. So to get to that one a little bit more, everything comes in increments. Puck once said, and I like this a lot. Puck was said in a podcast that he gave. We start our students off in a world of artifice, and then as we learn, we cut away that artifice. So you first learn drills that would almost never happen in real life, because you have to learn the motions, you have to learn the actions. Then as they start mastering that set of skills, you start adding in realism. You start adding in something that might actually happen so that they can start adjusting to that, and you build that up. I would say the same thing about learning a period style. So you get pretty good at some of the plates against, let's say I can fight Simon against, on some of these plates. And he and I have a very similar style. We understand each other very well. But then I go up against, I don't know, someone else who fights completely differently. And then it's a real test of how well did I internalize the things I learned playing with Simon? How well did I understand the inside and the outside and the controlling of the blade? So this is when you start stretching it, and a lot of people who fight in historical manner, they only fight against other people in historical manner. And so they don't start stretching out, and they'll do the whole, oh God, I hate fighting that guy because he does this weird thing. Well, it's like, well, use this as a learning environment. Use this to try and figure it out.
I couldn't agree more with that, actually, because that's one of the reasons I travel quite a bit and go to Adult Swim and Gulf Wars and Penzic, because I want to test my system against as many variables as possible, so it's more well-rounded. And I can't do that if I'm only fighting the same 5 people over and over again.
Right. Yep. What was your other question that I didn't answer though?
About students and like teaching and.
Okay. Well, I mean, so I've 2 of my students got their mod before I did, because I was in Ukraine when the mod started, I believe, but also they're awesome. Corvin and Alessandro, both of whom, in fact, they won back-to-back Queen's Champions in Onsteora, which I admit I rolled on the floor laughing when I heard that. Alessandro, it's funny, Alessandro was learning from me before I ever started studying Capoferro. So what he took from me was more how to analyze fights and make them work in your favor, because he does not mirror anything I do, honestly, but he does mirror the understanding of the fight and how it works in his favor and how he can turn it around. Corvin came and started working with me right about when I started really picking up Capoferro and trying to work through it the most. So he still has a bit of that in him. I've got a great crew here that I'm working with. And I had a spate of about like 6 or 8 months where I had 2 of my students get white scarves, 1 get a mod, and 1 or 2 get free scholars here in Atlantia. And so that was a huge kind of an ego boost to me. And it's not all my fault. Atlantia has the very much catch and release program of students. But I was happy to see them really understand. One of my students, Fern, we all had this aha moment. I was watching him fence, and he would gain a blade, but then as he started moving, he would lose it. He would just get knocked away and get killed over and over again. So I took a moment and looked at his legs and looked at his structure, and what he was doing is he would gain the blade, but then as he fired, he would recenter dead line, and then he would go straight in, and his knee would actually go cross inside his body a little bit. So he was suddenly very weak in this angle. So he would stringer the blade, and then he would give up that entire advantage and get knocked out of the way as soon as he started moving. So as soon as he and I kind of understood that and started correcting it, he started building his knee up at home with exercises, man, his game shot up. His game just went off the charts. So he was doing the right thing, but structurally there were some problems that I wasn't seeing at first that we then corrected. But yeah, no, I'm really proud of the group we have around here. And I'm also, and this is fun, and this means you've been in a long time. When people come up to you after and they say, this thing you did 15 years ago affected me and it changed everything I've ever done about the SCA. And I've had a few people walk up to me and do that. And I don't even consider them students, but that that gives you reason to keep doing stuff, you know?
Yeah, I've definitely, because I visit Atlanta like every now and then. I've seen some of the guys you've worked with, and I'll see them like once or twice a year maybe, and so I see like I can see the progress, because when you see someone every week, it's hard to see the progress. So it's cool to be like, oh yeah, this person has gotten so much better. That's really been fun to see that. Another question I had was, how do you feel about video reviewing and using video as a tool for teaching?
I think it's excellent, and I think I hate it. I can't stand watching myself on video. Like I said, I have to mentally get past all of the negatives I see in my stance.
I'm sorry I made you do that for an hour.
No. And it's perfect. And actually, the funny thing was, so my series of fights with Boomy that I sent you, I've got really good form in most of that. But
Yeah.
But it is interesting that I can watch and I can see where I'm kidding myself. I can think that I'm controlling the line a lot, and I watch it and I think, oh my God, I was letting that go a whole bunch. So I am all for it. I just really hate being in front of the camera, whether it's a still camera or the video camera. That's just my thing.
No, something I say, and that's something Duke Sven also talks about, is you have your mental image of what happened, and then you have reality, and they don't always overlap totally. And the video is a great tool to get them to be where they're closer to being the same, and it can be a painful process. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I'm obviously I'm a huge fan of video. That's why I'm doing all these video review classes. But
I am, so deep down inside, and yes, Randy, I am a drummer. Deep down inside, I'm a drummer. And by that, I mean this. My place, I always feel like, is behind the scenes, trying to make the things happen, trying to do the things. So I don't like being the lead singer on stage. I don't like being the one out there, putting myself out there and doing stuff. But I will do that if it pushes my agenda, my goal forward, or whatever. But that has been my personality in so many different ways that I have to get over my desire to not be in front of, in the front of the stage. I to get up and stand in front and talk to people, I have to put on a persona because I just don't like doing it.
that's interesting. Oh crap, I had another question. What was it? Please, anyone else, please, if you have questions or just anything at this point, we're kind of getting
a variation.
Wind up a little bit.
Go ahead, Michael. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I did have a question. Aaron, you mentioned earlier about a fighter who was in your head and you had to go out and face them in a tournament when they were already living rent-free in your head. And I'm sure that is neither the first nor the last fighter that has happened with. And I guess my question is, how did you wind up kind of moving past it? Because obviously you were able to defeat this person. It isn't some like catastrophic difference in your skill level. It's something that's like kind of psychological about that particular fighter or their style. So how do you work yourself past it? Because I'm sure it's happened before.
So sometimes, I'll say this, sometimes it can happen organically. So there might be a point, and I'll use Edward as the example. There might be a point where Edward's having kind of a blah day and I'm having a sharp day, and I face mask him. That can get me mentally over that hump and put us on even footing. But in other times with Edward, what I vaguely remember happened with Edward was he kept hitting me with the same basic stuff. And that was, he would drop his shoulder and he would go for my toe. And as soon as I tried to defend that toe, he would pull the point right up into my face. And it was a drop up. And he hit me with that a few times. So I just had to start protecting against that. Now, he's also a fabulous fencer in other ways, but I already kind of had control of the other parts of his game, or at least, on an even keel. So for me, it was just a matter of making sure that one shot he always had on me, he never had anymore. And it might have also been that I had an on day while he had an off day, because half of our fighting is in our heads. Half of our good or our bad is in our own heads. And there's even something that we talked about years ago. Avery will remember this, the Queen's Champion hump. Once you've won one, it becomes kind of easier to win anymore after that, because you've kind of gotten past that. The first time that you were basically the best in the kingdom is effectively kind of what it translates into. So that is all the mental game. That is a whole bunch of the mental game that experienced fighters can help others, the intermediate and the newer fighters get through eventually. But your skill has to get to that point before you even face that wall effectively.
And I am actually have a lot of content that I want to do around that subject, actually various panel discussion stuff, because it's something that I was really bad at for a long time. I'm really bad at tournaments. I would get super nervous. So part of my point of talking about it is that, and Aaron brings it up too, it's like a lot of times I think newer fighters feel like, because I remember feeling this way, I would look at the fighters that I admired and I'd be like, well, they don't get nervous. They just look like they look so easy. It's like, how does that happen? And then talking to them, you realize like, oh no, they had all the same struggles I had, and got nervous and had had a fighter in their head, all the things. And so I try to make sure that and I think it's great that Aaron's doing too. I try to speak very openly about my own struggles, because I want people to know that it's something you can work on and improve and get over. So.
And one of the reasons I teach the way I teach is, if it's an all or nothing thing, it becomes harder. If the end goal is to win the fight or win the tournament, it becomes harder to do that. If your end goal when you're free fighting is to get them to hit you in the left shoulder, if that is your end game, then they can both get the point and you got your own win. Then you turn up the volume a little bit. Okay, well now I'm going to get them to hit my shoulder, but I'm going to parry it. So this is changing your win condition and working your way up skill-wise until suddenly you're winning. My favorite luthier who has died, and by luthier I mean a person who makes stringed musical instruments. He said something I think is amazing and profound about mastery. And he said that he'd been making lutes for dozens of years, and then one day one of them just fell out of his hands. He didn't have to do anything. He didn't have to readjust anything. He didn't have to back up and take things apart and redo it. It just happened. And then he says, a year or two later, another one just fell out of his hands. And what's happening there is you are subconsciously making all the micro adjustments that you need to make the wood work, to make it all work together. And this is, to me, mastery isn't 10,000 hours. Mastery isn't you gave me a white collar. Mastery is when all the things that you've worked on doing start happening just because they happen, just subconsciously or unconsciously. And the funny thing is, and here's the downfall of this, fights can get boring. Because if you suddenly just pull them off and you're beating everyone, it's kind of boring. And what a lot of us want to have is that Three Musketeers fight, ha ha, he he, crash, crash, bang, bang, right? But once you start getting to where it's all falling into place, it's both fantastic and it's like, wait, but that's all there is? But it takes years. It takes a long time to get there. And it does take, overcoming that mental thing. But again, this is why I try to tell people, don't set winning the fight as your goal when you're free fighting. Try and find another goal that is either more difficult or more easy, depending on what you want, but that means you're controlling your fight, that you are learning how to control your fight to some degree.
Real quick, two quick things that go on what you're talking about. Gwyneth has a statement that she says she knew when she was getting close to being good was she realized she kept going into these tournaments and it felt like she was fighting nothing but list meat. And then suddenly, like 6 months, a year into it, she realized, wait, it's not that there's nothing but list meat out there. It's that, oh, I'm better. So therefore, more of what you are facing qualifies as, as list meat. And so that was an interesting thing. But then going on to what Michael said, I think there's a mental shift that you have to take with yourself on a situation that you have to overcome, or a certain person you you know, like you said, has a 3-room apartment in your head, whatever. I made it to the finals with more on-Stewart queens without winning than anyone else before I won my first one. And the one that I finally won, the first time I won one, the night before Duke Gunther, we were staying with Gunther and Elizabeth. Gunther had just finally won his second crown after like a 10-year break in between winning the first one, winning the second one. And what he told me was the difference for him with winning that second one was he didn't go out every other time he'd gotten that far. He'd gone out there going, oh shit, I don't want to lose. And the time where he finally broke through was, no, I'm going to win. You know, and it's a different mental shift, but it's fighting the fight to win the fight rather than fighting the fight not to lose the fight.
Right. And let me add to that. Everyone has their own way of addressing this.
Yep.
Hawkins, Don Hawkins, he liked to get himself into a good mad. He would work himself into a good mad before he went into a tournament. And that's how he liked to fight tournaments. I am the opposite. If I am not Zen, I'm not going to do very well. So I tend to, and this is part of what we're talking about, not doing pickup fights. I will take the moment where I'm putting on my armor and I'm getting myself ready. And actually, Lisa has even said I can be a real asshole at tournaments. But what I'm doing is I'm clearing my head. I don't want to talk to people. I kind of don't want to see people. I'm moving it all out of my own head. And interestingly enough, actually, there's a great book called Thinking Fast and Slow. One of the things that the researchers in that book talk about is when you start thinking about certain things, that actually triggers the mental pathways to bring the rest of it to your head. So if you're putting your armor on and you're thinking about thrusting and you're thinking about moving and you're thinking about your parries, you are preparing your brain to work at a faster speed than if you just walk onto the field and you haven't thought about fencing. So one way that I prepare for fencing is to be quiet, to put my armor on, maybe to go to a fence post and to try and make sure that I'm hitting up and down the post and my targeting is on. More importantly, my range is on so I don't go gacking my friends, right? That is me getting into the mode of the tournament. And everyone has their way of doing it. And so one thing you all have to do is figure out what is your way of getting into tournament mindset. What is the thing that makes you either geared up to where, ooh, or very, very calm. Yoda fighting pisses me off because to me, Yoda would be the ultimate Zen master. He wouldn't get his face all mad. He wouldn't get it all screwed up while he's fighting. He would be very calm, and that's how he would gain his quickness, right? That's where I come from. That's where I am much more in the moment. In fact, the times I can think of where time has stood still in fights, I was absolutely Zen. I didn't care one way or the other what was going on. I was simply solving the puzzle in front of me. And I can remember 3 specific fights where I'm fencing and there was this gaping hole in front of me. And my thought was, they're going to fill that hole. They're going to fill that hole. They didn't fill that hole. I'm just going to reach out and touch them. But everyone on the side of the field were like, that was the fastest thing I've ever seen. So that was my brain that had gone into a very fast processing mode, and it slowed everything down in my vision. And you can talk to Duke Keen, has a few moments like that where he's like, oh yeah, you see the opening, and from your point of view, you just reach out and you hit, right? From their point of view, there's no way they could have protected it because it was so fast. But in order to get there, I have to have no cares and no worries, and my brain has to be very clear.
Do you do a lot of visualization of fights, like just in everyday, like between tournaments or practices or anything? Or
I have. I still do a little bit. I have learned that I can't do it when I go to bed because then I stay awake visualizing fights over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a good portion of training is visualization. The virtual 12-week class I just gave on rapier over the fall, I talk about that. I talk about, in order to learn how to stringer and gain in this, solo world that we've been in for the past year, you need to work on your visualization skills. You need to work on visualizing, cutting your opponent's line off and making them go around your sword so that you can practice getting that gain and getting that disengage. Yeah, I think it's extremely valuable. Every professional and Olympic athlete I know of has some kind of visualization thing that they go through, and they'll spend several minutes of their practice day just thinking through the thing that they have to do.
Well, and visualization is also a type of practice you can almost always do it, because regardless of like if you're injured or you can always visualize. I a lot of times can't not visualize. Like,
Yeah.
I don't choose to. Sometimes I just can't not.
Something I realized early on in my technical writing days was I have the ability to think of a computer and to take it apart in my head and have all the pieces floating out in front of me. And this helped me as a technical illustrator to figure out how to, to illustrate different things. But it took me a while to realize that not everyone has that ability. So one of the things that has benefited me when I've been teaching and when I write is I can actually think of a fight from both people's point of view and think through all of the options and think through if this person did that and this person did that. But I've seen a lot of people, they really need to have that extra, that person to work against to see what the options are. So that is a big benefit that I actually have, that I try to bring into my teaching. Whenever I listen to what my students are saying, I try and visualize what they're talking about so I can work through, okay, here's where your hole is, here's what's going on, here's where here's what's wrong.
Very cool. On last month's episode, Duke Miguel talked about how he couldn't visualize sometimes because he would get so amped up, like he feel like he was about to fight in the tournament, and he would make himself anxious, and so he just has to actively not do it.
I can't visualize the fight going into the fight. I can visualize my actions. I can visualize doing a good stringer. I can visualize doing a good gain, but I don't try and think through the fight with the opponent I'm going to see, because I will psych myself out.
Interesting.
Yeah, so that's how, going back to the thinking fast and slow, that's how I try and kickstart all the options in my head, and it's like I'm bringing them into quick memory, from long-term memory, the different actions that I can use, by simply thinking through what it's like to gain someone in seconda and hit them, what it's like to stand in a deep terza, what it's like to go into prima, and just simply thinking through all those things, my body starts bringing all of the associated parts into my short-term memory.
Do you want to talk a little bit about Lord Baltimore? Maybe give that a little bit of a plug.
Yeah, sure. I can talk about a few things, actually.
Or anything else you're up to, actually. Yeah, would be great.
Yeah. One, I am finally, after years, writing my book.
Oh, yay.
A few of you on here know that. I gave this 12-week course back in the fall for Tattersall, and it wasn't until I formed that course from beginning to end that I realized, well, I'll go further than this, but that I realized that I really do have a pathway to take someone from very beginning to advanced tactics, all the way through. Because I'd never really sat down and looked at all my classes end to end, until I had to think through it. But also Guy Windsor twisted my arm when he was down here for Lord Baltimore's. He was asking me why I haven't written a book yet, because most of the people I was training with back in 2000, 2004 have written some book. And I told him that basically he and Devin and a few others have written kind of, what I might write. And he came back with, no, you've got a unique way of looking at it too. So you should get your unique way down. And as I started thinking through it, he's right. My way of addressing from beginning to end takes a different path than Guy's does. Even if we get to the same, basically, end point, we kind of approach it differently. And one of the strengths is to see different instructors teach different things. So yeah, so he kind of talked me into go ahead and doing it. So I'm trying to work on the first two parts of a 3-part book, which is going to be the beginning part, and then working on plates. And at the end of that, you will be working on actual tactics. And then I'm going to try and put out another thing later on about advanced tactics. This is what it's like to actually think through fights and to make them work in your direction. So there's that going on. Lord Baltimore's. Okay, so some interesting stuff happening on Lord Baltimore's challenge. For those of you, does anyone on here not know Lord Baltimore's? I'm trying to see who else.
Go ahead and because this is going to be recorded, and we'll post it on YouTube.
Oh yeah, that's true. Good
just
point.
Go ahead and just for posterity.
That's true. And Lisa might not know because she's never been involved in Lord Baltimore's before. So in fact, that the tournament that you showed, the tournament where I was fighting in against Paolo and the others in the HEMA fights, I went to that. Lisa drew me to go fight in that, and I saw what was going on, and I thought, I can do this better. I can make a tournament work better than this. So I started thinking through what that would look like, and David Koblenz invited me out to Surfo to see what they do, because he thought his rule set is very good, and it is. He does a great job out there. And so I got a great crew together, including Lisa, to run Lord Baltimore's. And this is for lack of a better way of saying it, I really like to call it an independent sword tournament, but it's kind of a HEMA SCA crossover, where I am taking the best of SCA rule sets and the best of HEMA rule sets and trading them back and forth. So it's self-called and it's judged. And part of it is I'm trying to bring in the best instructors in the world, and they are playing two roles. They are the ring directors for the fighting, and then the next day they are teaching classes. They're teaching the best classes you can get to for side sword and for rapier. We've had two very successful ones. We're working up and looking at what a third would look like. And here's the news. DC Open probably won't happen anymore. And DC Open was happening on Martin Luther King weekend in January. So we are now looking at grabbing MLK weekend in January and making that LBC from now on. That means the next one might be in less than a year. It might be in January 2022.
Awesome.
I already have the instructor lineup. I need to make sure that they're all fine switching from summer to winter. But if we do it MLK, that also means we might be able to expand, although I'm a little hesitant about that, because our limitation isn't as much time as it is directors, getting the skilled directors in. Because the way I want to run this, the way we've run it the past 2 years, and I want to keep running it, is that directors are extremely experienced teachers and fencers. And then judges, I try to get as much experience as I can, but it's okay if you have one experienced judge and one moderately experienced judge, as long as your director is spot on and really strong. So what I'm trying to do is show people basically what a good, strong tournament can look like, mixed with what some of the best classes in the world look like at the same time. So that's happening. I will add to that we are going to require vaccinations, or an absolute, honest to God reason from a doctor that you can't be vaccinated before you can show up. We're not going to dilly-dally around with I'm not going to be vaccinated, or I'm not going to wear a mask, or whatever. Everything else is still in flux. We haven't really sat down and talked about what we want to do yet. I still need to find a venue for January. I think I may have a line on one. And we will see where it goes. But hopefully, I've got a lot going on this summer, but hopefully we can get it going. Since we've already done two, it shouldn't be too much of a pull to put together a third, since my crew is the best damn crew in the world.
Also, I've been to both of the first two, and it was very enjoyable. So I would recommend.
It's interesting, because a lot of the responses I get back whenever we do our survey consists of a bunch of HEMA guys saying, "Oh my God, I thought SCAers were all assholes, but they were really great." And another set of responses that Brad will, I think, be familiar with is, "Man, I thought SCAers couldn't fight, but they kicked my ass." And yeah, we've been doing this a long time. We do rapier. We do multiple tournaments a month, if you're in a good kingdom for it. So yeah.
So question on it.
Yep.
From someone who's looked at them from the outside. In my situation, I'm a relative latecomer to trying to attempt to learn a more period style with a lot of SCA under my belt. I've been trying to break myself of on Styron Gunslinger for the last year, and it's hard with no one else to fight with. So I'm assuming that you will say there's value in that. I'm just kind of, if I were to come to that, I'm just curious what theoretically one would get out of that in that situation.
So that's up to you in a way, Theron. That's up to you. You can come test yourself against guys who, in theory, now okay, HEMA and SCA have all the same weaknesses. The fighters, they have all the same strengths and weaknesses. There is no one system better than the other one. I can beat HEMA fighters with the exact same stuff I beat SCA fighters with. The biggest difference is generally HEMA fighters armor up more and hit a little harder, generally. It has happened a little bit at LBC, but not any more than I've seen in some SCA tournaments. So, and also we are cranking down on it. Guy will throw your ass out if he's your director. I think my upcoming directors will do the same thing. I think there's benefit in it. I think it's interesting to watch the cross-pollination. It's interesting to watch a lot of the people who've been sportified in HEMA. It's also interesting, so this is from my point of view, it's interesting watching the HEMA guys learning how to self-call, learning how to be very cognizant of what just happened around them and say, no, I don't want to take that. I don't. Whereas, you know, a year before in another tournament, they would have taken it without question. So if you want to push your own skill, it's a whole new pool in a way to push it. You will meet some of the best SCA fighters. You may meet John, for instance, in a fight. But you will also meet some interesting fighters who come from a HEMA background and who do things you may not expect. But then, you know, again, you'll get that in the SCA too if you go to Penzig or if you go to Gulfforge or whatever. So for SCA fighters, the only thing that really makes it any kind of different is expect a little bit higher calibration of hitting. But even then, we had one of our local fighters who has been doing it for a long time, but she's never gotten very good. She came in and had a blast, and she didn't feel like she got bowled over by anyone. She didn't feel like she got run down.
Yeah, she was very worried, but I also point out that we're also coming. Sorry about the bird. LBC is in Atlanta, and for me, I don't have much of a difference in calibration within rapier and cut and thrust between the two, being in my kingdom. If I was coming from a different kingdom, it might look much more a larger difference, but not where we are.
Yeah, Atlanta hits harder.
Atlanta is upper level on Stewart as far as how they hit. It's not
pretty much the same.
It's nothing unreasonable than, you know, old backyard.
My cadets from there.
Yeah.
I'll also say one thing also having done it and coming from Onstewart and coming from, that's the only HEMA or only non-SCA fighting I've done. The fighters in the tournament, they weren't necessarily the ones I fought that were from HEMA background. They weren't necessarily fighting a more period system than an average SCA fighter. Nope. Really, they were really just fighting, and some of them were kind of doing it, and so it was really not that different at all from that perspective.
Really, because there are very few high-level rapier people on the HEMA side, so a lot of people are switching from where they might have a more historic style within longsword. They spend most of their time on that. On rapier, a lot of them are self-taught or don't have very experienced people to learn from. Yeah. So when they're walking in, you'll see much more historic fighting from a lot of people from the SCA than you'll see from a typical HEMA rapier fencer, because most of them have no one to learn from.
Yeah, so HEMA rapier right now, Europe likes to say they own HEMA rapier. And one of the reasons for doing LBC is I wanted to bring more rapier to the coast, to the East Coast, and side sword as well, which is, you know, translates as cut and thrust or sword and buckler. But yeah, so I wanted to bring more here. So basically what you've got for a lot of the HEMA fighters are intermediate SCA level fighters for some of the top ones. There are some that are amazing. I can think of a few that are extremely hard to fight. But for instance, that fight you guys just watched me fight with Jeremy, that was our first medals, both of us. He got gold, I got silver. Jeremy landed in number 15 in the world on the HEMA list. I landed in the mid-20s. So top SCA fighters who fight their way through a few tournaments will be rated in the top X in HEMA. So you're not going to run into anything you haven't already seen, is I guess my point.
The most challenging fights I had at Lord Baltimore were all mods from the SCA. It was Wistrick, Gage, Illidan. It was all that. It wasn't, none of the people from the HEMA background were as tough a fight that I drew.
Well, now what was funny was the first LBC, SCA dominated the rapier and HEMA dominated sword and buckler. So that it was interesting to see how that played out, because it was a perfect match. It worked its way down from the gold, silver, and bronze. So that was an interesting.
Also the change in rule sets too.
Yeah. Yep. So that was fascinating. But yeah, so two sets of rules. I do sword and buckler and a sword and dagger. Tend to be a very long tournament because they are fighting to 90 seconds or 15 points or whatever it is. I can't remember how we lay it out.
I think it's 15.
Yeah. And those tend to be pretty long fights for various reasons. But then I have two other tournaments that are single rapier or single sword, single side sword, that is one and done. So very few fights go the full 90 seconds, and those tend to be very fast tournaments. Well, the HEMA guys bitch about that one. I didn't get enough time to fight. It's like, well, you had a pool of 5 people. You had 4 fights, so get over it, right?
And it's basically an SCA format, right? One pass.
Exactly. Yeah, it is a judged SCA format. And the thing I wanted to bring out was simply the best of both types, because there's a lot of cool things that happen in a judged tournament or in a judged fight. You get to replay mistakes. You get to play your opponent a little bit and figure them out. You've got a lot of things you can do with it. But there's the one and done where you've got to watch yourself. You've got one chance and one chance only.
Everyone gets a little time in their comfort zone and out of their comfort zone.
And a real fight would also only be one and done, obviously.
Well, I mean, we could talk about that if you want to. There are plenty of stories, people being stabbed multiple times. So, but yeah.
But theoretically,
sure.
Theoretically, if you probably wouldn't want to let someone stab you and then be like, oh, I could have blocked it that time. And
well, and here's the interesting thing, and this is kind of a generalization, but this is the thing I thought was interesting between a side sword or cut and thrust versus rapier. With rapier, and we're talking real swords, very often you would be run through multiple times and you wouldn't die until later. With side sword, historically, you can be cut with a fight ender. It cuts through your bicep, it cuts through your thigh or whatever, but you would live through that fight. So the one can generally be a fight ender that you live through. The other one can be, it didn't end the fight at all, but you're going to die later on anyway.
I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I'm going to stop the recording. People can stay on chat for a little bit after that, but I'm going to stop the recording so the video. So thanks for everyone for coming, and thanks Aaron for letting us talk about fighting for a couple hours. My next guest will be Master Toritaka. I haven't quite figured out the exact details of when that's going to come out, but look for that sometime in June. So, and thanks for everyone for being here.
Cool. Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Thank you, David.